I watched my sister Rachel accept the Audiobook Narrator of the Year award on my phone screen, her perfectly manicured hand clutching the crystal trophy while my voice, my actual voice, echoed through the auditorium speakers. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hearing myself narrate her acceptance speech through the hospice room's tinny speaker, my real voice now barely a whisper after 6 months of aggressive throat cancer treatment. I put my heart and soul into this performance, Rachel gushed to the camera, and I felt Mom's hand tighten around mine. Even she could hear it. That was me speaking those words, inflecting every emotion, breathing life into a story I'd recorded in secret sessions Rachel had insisted were just practice runs for her own audiobook debut. I died 3 hours later, and then I woke up 7 years earlier, gasping in my childhood bedroom, 23 years old again, and absolutely furious. The digital clock read 3:47 a.m., June 15th, 2016. I knew this date. I'd circled it in my original timeline as the night everything changed. The night Rachel had knocked on my door with tears streaming down her face, begging me to help her with a secret project that would save her career. The night I'd been stupid enough to say yes. But this time, I had something Rachel didn't. I knew exactly how this story ended. I sat up slowly, my hand automatically going to my throat. The skin was smooth, healthy, cancer-free. I could breathe without pain. I could swallow without agony. Most importantly, I could speak without the raspy whisper that had defined my final months. "Testing," I said aloud, and nearly sobbed at the sound of my own clear, strong voice. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, right on schedule. Rachel's name lit up the screen with a text. "Are you awake? I really need to talk to you. It's an emergency. Can I come over?" In my first life, I'd responded immediately. I'd thrown on clothes and met her at the door within 10 minutes, ushering her into my home studio apartment with concern etched on my face. By dawn, I'd agreed to record 75 hours of narration for what she claimed was a friend's indie project that needed to be finished urgently. She'd paid me $2,000 cash, money I desperately needed at the time, and sworn me to secrecy because her friend was paranoid about intellectual property theft. The beautiful, tragic irony. I stared at the text message, my finger hovering over the screen. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her immediately, to tell her I knew what she was planning, to refuse. But I'd spent my final months in that hospice bed doing nothing but thinking, planning, and plotting revenge scenarios I'd never lived to execute. Now I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it on immediate gratification. I typed back, "Give me 20 minutes. Come to the side door." I needed to let this play out almost exactly as it had before, but with one crucial difference. This time, I'd be documenting everything. Rachel arrived looking perfectly distressed. Mascara slightly smudged, hair artfully disheveled, wearing the expensive athleisure that somehow cost more than formal wear. At 26, she'd already cultivated the look of a successful lifestyle influencer, though her real dream had always been audiobook narration. The problem was that Rachel had a beautiful face and a mediocre voice. Nasally, flat, and incapable of the emotional range professional narration required. I, on the other hand, had been blessed with what one voice coach had called liquid gold, a naturally warm, versatile instrument that could slide from sultry whisper to commanding authority without strain. I'd been doing voiceover work since high school, building a modest but steady career narrating educational content and small indie audiobooks. Rachel hated that about me. I'd known it even in my first timeline, but I'd deluded myself into thinking family loyalty meant more than professional jealousy. "Thank God you're awake," Rachel said, pushing past me into my tiny studio. "I'm in serious trouble, and you're the only person who can help me." I played my part perfectly, concerned, attentive, naive. "What's wrong?" She launched into her rehearsed story. Her friend Melissa had landed a massive audiobook contract for a viral dark romance novel that was about to blow up. The original narrator had backed out last minute due to a family emergency. Melissa was desperate, facing penalty clauses and a tight deadline. The publisher didn't know the narrator had changed. If Rachel could help by letting me record it quickly, they could save the project and split the fee. It was all lies, of course. There was no Melissa. Rachel had landed the contract herself through her agent. but she knew she couldn't deliver the quality required. So she'd decided to use my voice and pass it off as her own work. I know it's weird, Rachel said, but Melissa is really private about her narrator identity. She performs under a pseudonym. So we just need the audio files. You don't even need to be credited. It's like ghostwriting, but for voices. Ghost speaking, I suggested, and watched her face light up. Exactly, and she's paying really well. I can give you $2,000 for about a week's worth of work. In my first life, $2,000 had seemed like a fortune. I'd been struggling to pay rent after my car died and needed emergency repairs. In this timeline, I had the same financial pressures, the same desperation. But I also had something my past self hadn't, knowledge of what those recordings would become. The Midnight Serpent would explode beyond anyone's expectations. Within 6 months of release, it would hit every major bestseller list. The audiobook, narrated by Rachel Winters, would win awards, generate millions in revenue, and launch Rachel into the elite tier of celebrity audiobook narrators. She'd sign a 6-figure multi-book deal. She'd be interviewed on podcasts, featured in industry magazines, invited to exclusive conventions, all on the foundation of my stolen voice. And when I'd discovered the truth, when I'd heard my own voice coming from Rachel's performance in a bookstore 2 years later, and confronted her, she'd threatened to destroy me. She'd claimed I'd signed a work-for-hire agreement. I hadn't. She'd said I had no proof. I didn't. She'd told me that if I went public, she'd ruin my reputation in the industry, claim I was a jealous wannabe trying to steal credit for her work. I'd backed down then, too afraid of the legal battle, too naive about how much power she'd accumulated. By the time my cancer diagnosis came 3 years after that, Rachel had moved on to even bigger projects. She'd sent a fruit basket to my hospital room with a card that read, "Thinking of you," in her assistant's handwriting. "I'll do it," I told her now, watching relief flood her features. "But I need you to be honest with me about something." Her expression flickered, just for a moment. "Of course. Anything. Is this really for your friend, or is this for you?" The question hung between us. In my first timeline, I hadn't asked this. I'd been too trusting, too eager to help my big sister. Rachel's laugh was light, practiced. "Why would I lie about that? You know I already have my own projects lined up. This is me helping out a friend, that's all." She was a better liar than I remembered. "Okay," I said, "Then I need some things in writing, just to protect both of us." This was my first deviation from the original timeline. In my past life, we'd worked on a handshake and trust. This time, I pulled out my laptop and drafted a quick agreement. "This just says that I'm recording narration for a book on behalf of your friend Melissa, that I retain rights to my voice recording, and that the $2,000 is payment for the recording session only, not a transfer of ownership or rights. Standard freelancer stuff." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly as she read it over. I could see her calculating, wondering if this was a red flag, if she should back out. "Melissa will be fine with this," I pressed, "since she's the one hiring me through you?" "Of course," Rachel said smoothly. She signed it. "Melissa just needs the files, not the drama. This protects everyone." I made 2 copies, gave her one, and saved the other in my fireproof safe. Then I took a picture of her signature with my phone and backed it up to 3 different cloud services. "When do we start?" I asked. "Tonight," Rachel said, "when Ines, we need to move fast." I spent the next 6 days recording The Midnight Serpent in my home studio, a converted walk-in closet with sound-dampening foam and professional-grade equipment I'd saved for 2 years to afford. Rachel sat in my living room the entire time, ostensibly to direct me and make sure the pacing matched what Melissa wanted, but really to ensure I never saw the actual contract or publication details. But I already knew every detail. I'd memorized them during my months in hospice, having nothing else to do but research exactly how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. The book was a dark romance about a woman who makes a deal with a demon and falls into a twisted power dynamic that somehow became empowering by the end. It required vocal range I'd spent years developing, the ability to sound vulnerable and vicious, terrified and terrifying, often within the same paragraph. I poured everything into that performance, knowing it would be my evidence later. I also made sure to record every single session on a secondary device Rachel didn't know about. My phone sat innocuously on the desk, seemingly just playing music on low to help me focus. In reality, it was documenting everything: the timestamps, Rachel's directions, my performance, and occasionally Rachel's phone calls when she stepped into the hallway. "No, the narrator thing is handled," I heard her say during one call on day 4. "I've got someone doing it for cheap. The publisher will never know." "Yeah, my voice. Well, close enough that no one will notice." I smiled as my phone captured every word. On the final day, Rachel handed me the $2,000 in cash, gave me a tight hug, and made me promise once more to keep the project confidential. "Melissa is really paranoid," she emphasized. "She doesn't want anyone knowing about the narrator change. Industry politics, you know?" "Of course," I said. My lips are sealed. Rachel took all the raw audio files, and I watched her leave with a USB drive containing 75 hours of my work, my voice, my talent. Then I went back inside and spent 3 hours organizing my backup files, the signed agreement, the recorded conversations, and starting a detailed timeline document of everything I knew would happen next. I titled it Evidence, Voice Theft, Rachel Winters. The audiobook released 4 months later under Rachel's name. I'd spent those months preparing. I'd consulted with 3 different intellectual property lawyers using free initial consultation sessions, piecing together advice without revealing my full situation yet. I'd researched every case of voice acting theft, audiobook fraud, and work-for-hire disputes I could find. I'd built a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy, but I didn't strike yet. Because in my first timeline, I'd learned that timing was everything. Rachel needed to get big enough that the fall would hurt. The audiobook needed to become valuable enough that the royalties would be worth fighting for. And I needed Rachel to commit herself so thoroughly to the lie that there would be no way out. So I watched and documented as the Midnight Serpent climbed the charts. I screenshot every interview where Rachel discussed her process and her interpretation of the characters. I saved every social media post where she accepted congratulations for her performance. I recorded every podcast where she demonstrated her voice acting techniques by playing clips of me narrating. The most galling moment came 3 months after release when Rachel posted a video titled Behind the Scenes of My Award-Winning Narration. In it, she sat in a professional studio, not my closet, wearing expensive headphones, not my budget pair, and pretended to record scenes from the book. She played clips of my actual narration alongside shots of her mouthing the words, creating the illusion that she'd performed them. That video got 2 million views. Rachel's agent landed her a 6-book deal with a major publisher. The announcement came with a press release calling her the fresh voice of dark romance narration and praising her distinctive warmth and emotional depth. My warmth, my depth. I went to the bookstore where I'd discovered the truth in my first timeline, found the audiobook display, and stood there listening to my own voice promote my sister's career. An older woman beside me picked up the display copy. "This narrator is incredible," she said. "Rachel Winters. I'll listen to anything she narrates." "Thank you," I almost said, but caught myself. Instead, I smiled and replied, "You should check out the narrator's other work." "Does she have other books out?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'm sure she'll be very busy soon." The real turning point came 11 months after the release. The Midnight Serpent won the Audiobook Narrator of the Year award at the Voice Arts Awards ceremony in Los Angeles. Rachel walked the red carpet in a designer gown, gave interviews about her craft, and accepted the Crystal Trophy with a speech about persistence and believing in your dreams. I watched the live stream from my studio apartment, eating ramen and making notes. The award ceremony was my timeline's point of no return. In my first life, this was when I'd finally snapped and confronted Rachel, too angry to think strategically. She'd been at the height of her power, surrounded by industry professionals and legal protection. I'd been a nobody making wild accusations. This time, I waited 3 more weeks. I waited until the awards bump had translated into even more contracts, until Rachel had signed the deals that assumed she could deliver more audiobooks in her signature style, until she'd given enough interviews that the web was saturated with her claiming ownership of my work. Then I went to see Patricia Martinez, the intellectual property attorney I'd selected after months of research. She specialized in entertainment law and had a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers considered too complicated or too personal. "Tell me everything," Patricia said, leaning back in her leather chair. "And I mean everything. Don't leave out details because you think they make you look bad or naive. I need the full picture." I laid it out for her, the late-night request, the fake story about Melissa, the $2,000, the signed agreement stating I retained rights to my voice recordings, the proof that Rachel had published my work as her own, and the 11 months of evidence showing she'd built an entire career on stolen material. Then I played her side-by-side recordings, my original session recordings, time-stamped and backed up across multiple platforms, the released audiobook under Rachel's name. The match was undeniable. Same voice, same performance, same subtle breathing patterns and emotional inflections that made a narration unique. Patricia listened to 5 minutes of comparison before stopping me. "This is the most clear-cut case of voice acting theft I've seen in 20 years of practice," she said. "Your sister is monumentally stupid." "She thought I'd never find out," I said, "or that I'd be too afraid to do anything if I did." "Why did you wait almost a year?" "I wanted her to succeed," I said simply. "I wanted the audiobook to be worth something. I wanted her to build everything on a foundation of fraud so that when I pulled it out from under her, the whole thing would collapse." Patricia's smile was sharp. "You and I are going to get along very well." We filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday morning. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal writing, 73 pages detailing every instance of fraud, misappropriation, copyright infringement, violation of moral rights, and unjust enrichment. We named Rachel as the primary defendant, her agent as a secondary defendant for knowingly promoting fraudulent work, and the publisher as a third party for negligent verification of the narrator's identity. We included the signed agreement showing I retained rights to my voice, time-stamped recordings proving I'd created the narration audio analysis from a forensic expert confirming the audiobook was my voice, not Rachel's screenshots of every interview and social media post where Rachel claimed credit, financial records showing the massive profits generated by my work, testimony from my sound engineer confirming the recording location and dates. We demanded all past royalties from the Midnight Serpent, all future royalties in perpetuity, damages for emotional distress and reputational harm, punitive damages for fraud and willful misappropriation, a public acknowledgement of the true narrator's identity, cancellation of all contracts Rachel had secured based on the stolen work. The lawsuit hit the entertainment news within hours. By evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, it was a full-blown scandal. The headlines were delicious. Award-winning audiobook narrator accused of stealing sister's voice. The Midnight Serpent controversy. Did Rachel Winters commit voice fraud? Sister versus sister, the audiobook industry's biggest scandal. My phone exploded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, journalists requesting interviews, and other voice actors sharing their own stories of exploitation. I ignored most of them, letting Patricia handle all communication. But I did read every single one of Rachel's increasingly unhinged social media posts. First, she claimed it was all a misunderstanding. "My sister helped me with some practice sessions. She's confused about what was used in the final product." Then denial. "These accusations are completely false. I narrated The Midnight Serpent entirely myself. I have studio time logs to prove it." Then anger. "I'm being attacked by a jealous family member who wants to steal credit for my hard work. This is character assassination." Then desperation. "Anyone who knows me knows I would never do something like this. Please, I'm begging people to stop believing these lies." Each post dug her deeper into the hole. Each claim of sole authorship was more evidence of fraud. Her agent dropped her after 48 hours. Her publisher suspended her contracts pending investigation. The Voice Arts Awards Committee announced they were conducting a review, and through it all, I stayed silent. Patricia had coached me well. Let the evidence speak. Let her panic and make mistakes. Let the internet do what the internet does best, investigate and amplify. Within a week, amateur audio analysts on TikTok and YouTube were posting side-by-side comparisons of my voice recordings, from my legitimate work that was publicly available, and the audiobook. The consensus was universal. Same narrator. Someone found footage of Rachel from a college theater production, demonstrating her natural speaking voice. Flat, nasally, nothing like the warm tones in the audiobook. Someone else tracked down the sound engineer who'd helped me set up my home studio and gotten him to confirm that yes, he'd seen Rachel visiting during a week-long recording session around the time of the audiobook's production. The internet had become my investigative team, my PR firm, and my validation all at once. Rachel's lawyer tried to fight back with a motion to dismiss, arguing that I'd waited too long to file the claim and that I'd entered into a work-for-hire agreement by accepting payment. Patricia demolished both arguments in her response brief. The statute of limitations begins when the plaintiff discovers the fraud, not when the fraud occurs. Ms. Winters worked extensively to hide her theft, including fabricating a story about a third party and restricting the plaintiff's access to publication information. The plaintiff discovered the fraud only upon the audiobook's release and needed time to gather sufficient evidence before filing. As for the work-for-hire argument, the defendant's own signed agreement explicitly states that the plaintiff retains rights to voice recordings and that payment was for recording session only, not a transfer of ownership or rights. The defendant cannot claim work-for-hire status while simultaneously possessing a document she signed, acknowledging the opposite. The motion to dismiss was denied. We moved into discovery, and that's when things got truly interesting. Patricia subpoenaed everything: Rachel's contracts with the publisher, her communications with her agent, her financial records, her social media DMs, and most damningly, her own computer files. What we found was even worse than I'd imagined. Rachel had attempted to create her own recordings of the book. We found 3 separate abandoned attempts in her computer's trash folder, each worse than the last. In one attempt, she'd even tried using voice modulation software to make her narration sound more like mine. The files were dated 2 weeks before she'd come to my door crying. We found messages to her agent. "Don't worry about the narrator quality. I have a solution. My sister does VO work, and she sounds close enough to me that no one will notice if I clean it up in post." We found her budget spreadsheet showing she'd allocated $2,000 for ghost narrator and pocketed the remaining $38,000 advance herself. We found her journal entries where she'd written things like, "Why does Emma get the good voice? It's not fair. I'm the one with the looks and the connections. I deserve this success more than she does." And most damaging of all, we found her search history from the week before she'd approached me. Can you use someone else's voice for audiobook? Is voice acting work for hire? How to modify audio to hide narrator identity? Legal consequences, voice theft. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd researched whether she could get away with it, and she'd decided the risk was worth it. The deposition was scheduled for a gray Tuesday in March, exactly 1 year after the audiobook had won its award. I sat across the conference table from Rachel for the first time since the lawsuit began, with Patricia beside me and Rachel's lawyer, her third since the scandal broke, looking exhausted and underprepared. Rachel had aged. The stress showed in the fine lines around her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured water from the pitcher. "For the record," Patricia began, "please state your name and relationship to the plaintiff." "Rachel Winters. I'm Emma's sister." "Older sister?" "Yes." "And you hired Emma to record narration for an audiobook project in June of 2016, correct?" I asked her to help with some practice recordings." Patricia slid a document across the table. "This is the agreement you signed with Emma. Please read the first paragraph aloud." Rachel's lawyer started to object, but Rachel waved him off. She read in a monotone, "Rachel Winters agrees to hire Emma Winters to record audiobook narration for a work tentatively titled The Midnight Serpent. Emma Winters retains all rights to her voice recordings. Payment of $2,000 is for recording session only and does not constitute a transfer of ownership or rights." Does that sound like practice recordings to you, Ms. Winters? "I didn't write this. Emma insisted on putting this in writing." "But you signed it. You agreed to these terms." "I was trying to help my sister. She was broke and needed money. You didn't think she'd expect you to honor the contract you signed?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "I didn't think she'd try to claim credit for my work." "Your work?" Patricia's eyebrow arched. "Let's listen to something." She played a clip from the audiobook, my voice narrating an emotional scene where the protagonist confronts her demon lover. Then she played a recording I'd made last month, reading the same passage. The match was undeniable. Same resonance, same vocal placement, same subtle ways I shaped vowels and emphasized consonants. "That's you narrating in both clips, Ms. Emma Winters?" Patricia asked me. "Yes." "Ms. Rachel Winters, is that your voice in either clip?" Rachel stared at the recorder, her face pale. The audiobook was a collaborative process. "Is that your voice performing the narration in the published audiobook?" "I oversaw the production." "Answer the question, please. Is that your voice or your sister's voice?" Silence stretched out. Rachel's lawyer whispered something to her, but she shook her head. "My sister recorded it," Rachel finally said, so quietly we almost couldn't hear. "But I directed her. I coached her performance. I made it what it was." "So, you admit that Emma performed 100% of the narration that appears in the published audiobook?" "Yes, but..." "And you then released that audiobook under your name, claiming to have performed the narration yourself?" "I made the creative decisions. Did you or did you not claim to have performed the narration yourself?" Rachel's composure cracked. What was I supposed to do? I had bills to pay. I had a career to build. Emma wasn't doing anything with her talent. She was wasting it on stupid corporate training videos and nobody audiobooks. I gave her voice meaning. I gave it a platform. She should be thanking me. The room went silent. Patricia let the moment breathe before asking almost gently, "So, to be clear, Ms. Winters, you believe your sister should thank you for stealing her work, claiming credit for her performance and building your entire career in fraud?" "I didn't steal anything. She agreed to record it." "For someone else? For your fictional friend Melissa?" Rachel flinched. "There is no Melissa, is there, Ms. Winters?" "That was just..." "I simplified the situation to make it easier for Emma to understand." "You lied to secure her cooperation in a scheme to commit fraud." "I gave her $2,000. That's more than she would have made on some indie book nobody read." "The audiobook has generated approximately $2.3 million in revenue to date," Patricia said calmly. "Your sister received $2,000. You received the remaining $298,000, plus the value of the contracts you passed, secured based on the fraudulent credit. Does that seem proportionate to you?" Rachel's face had gone from pale to red. "She's my sister. She's supposed to help me." "Help you commit fraud?" "Help me succeed." Why does everything have to be so dramatic? "So I used her voice for one book." So what? She wasn't using it for anything important. "I spoke for the first time in the deposition." "I was using it to breathe, Rachel, before the cancer." Rachel's eyes snapped to me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "In the original timeline, I got throat cancer," I said, watching her face. "Aggressive. Inoperable. I died at 30, barely able to speak above a whisper. And you know what I did in those final months? I researched. I found out what you'd done. I discovered that the audiobook I'd recorded in secret was making you rich and famous while I was dying, unable to even use my own voice anymore." "Original timeline?" Rachel's lawyer looked confused. What is she talking about? But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Rachel, watching the exact moment she realized her baby sister wasn't the same person she'd manipulated a year ago. "This is my second life, Rachel. I lived through your betrayal once already. I died knowing you'd stolen everything from me and gotten away with it. So when I woke up 7 years in the past, 23 years old again with my voice intact, I made a choice. I decided to let you do it all over again, but this time I documented everything. I built an airtight case. I waited until you'd climbed as high as you possibly could on your ladder of lies." I leaned forward, and then I pulled out every rung. Rachel stared at me like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way she was. "You're insane," she whispered. "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe dying and coming back gives you a different perspective on what matters." "You want to know what I learned in hospice, Rachel? That time is the most valuable thing we have, and you stole years of mine. Not just by taking my voice, but by making me afraid to use it. By making me think I was crazy for being angry. By convincing me that family loyalty meant letting you destroy me." Patricia cleared her throat gently, bringing us back to the legal proceeding. "I think we have what we need. Ms. Winters has admitted to fraudulent representation, acknowledged that the plaintiff performed 100% of the narration, and demonstrated a pattern of entitled behavior that shows willful intent to defraud." Rachel's lawyer tried one last desperate play. "My client was young and made a mistake. Surely we can reach a settlement." "No, Amnas," I said. At the same time, Patricia said, "Absolutely not." We discussed this. No settlements, no quiet resolution, no letting Rachel save face with a private agreement and a non-disclosure clause. This was going to trial. The trial began 6 weeks later on a warm May morning. The courtroom was packed with journalists, industry professionals, and curious onlookers who'd been following the scandal online. I'd become something of a folk hero in voice acting communities, a symbol of fighting back against exploitation. Patricia had put together a case so airtight it could survive space travel. Our expert witnesses included Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic audio specialist who testified that voice patterns are as unique as fingerprints, and that the audiobook was definitively my voice, not Rachel's. Marcus Thompson, my sound engineer, who confirmed he'd seen Rachel at my apartment during the recording period and had wondered at the time why she was there for a practice session. 3 independent voice actors who testified about industry standards, the value of narration work, and the catastrophic impact of voice theft on professional reputations. And most damaging of all, Rachel's own agent, the one who dropped her, who admitted under oath that Rachel had told him she'd found a solution to her voice quality issues, but had been vague about the details. He'd assumed she'd hired a voice coach, not a ghost narrator. The defense's strategy was to argue that I'd agreed to work for hire and was now trying to extort my successful sister out of jealousy. They tried to paint me as a bitter, failed voice actor who wanted to piggyback on Rachel's fame. It didn't work. Patricia shredded their argument in her cross-examination of Rachel, which took an entire day and left my sister in tears on the stand. "Ms. Winters, you've testified that your sister was aware the recordings would be used for the published audiobook. Why then did you tell her you were recording for a friend named Melissa?" I wanted to protect my professional relationships. By lying to your sister? It was a white lie to simplify things. And the contract you signed explicitly stating Emma retained rights to her recordings, was that also to simplify things? I didn't think she'd actually enforce it. Because you're sisters, and you assumed family meant you could exploit her without consequences? That's not what I meant. Ms. Winters, let me ask you directly. At any point during the recording sessions, during the audiobook's production, during its release, or during the 11 months before this lawsuit was filed, did you ever tell your sister that her voice would be released commercially under your name? No. Did you ever offer to share the advance money beyond the initial $2,000? No. Did you ever credit her in the audiobook's liner notes, acknowledgments, or any public statement? No, but did you, in fact, go on interviews and accept awards claiming you had personally performed 100% of the narration? Rachel's silence was answer enough. One more question, Ms. Winters. You testified earlier that you gave your sister's voice meaning and gave it a platform. Would you say the same thing if your sister had been a writer and you'd published her novel under your name? That's different. How? Writing is different from voice acting. Because Rachel struggled realizing the trap. Because it just is. Or is it because you don't respect voice acting as a legitimate creative art form? Because you see your sister's work as interchangeable raw material you can use however you want? I respect voice acting. Then why did you steal 75 hours of it? Rachel had no answer. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found in my favor on every count: fraud, misappropriation, copyright infringement, violation of moral rights, and unjust enrichment. The damages were even better than I'd hoped. All past royalties, $298,000. All future royalties, in perpetuity. Punitive damages, $3,000 to $1,000. Pain and suffering, $500,000. Legal fees, $150,000. Total, $5,948,000. But more than the money, the jury's verdict included specific findings of fact that would follow Rachel forever. The defendant knowingly and intentionally misrepresented her sister's work as her own, engaged in a calculated scheme of fraud, and showed no remorse for her actions. The defendant's behavior was not a misunderstanding or a mistake, but a willful choice to build her career on stolen labor. The courtroom erupted in applause, actually applause, which the judge quickly gavelled down. But the message was clear. I'd won not just legally, but morally. Rachel sat motionless at the defense table, staring at nothing. Outside the courthouse, I gave my first and only interview about the case. This was never just about the money, I told the cluster of reporters and cameras. This was about establishing that voice actors deserve the same protections and respect as any other creative professional. Your voice is your instrument, your signature, your identity. When someone steals it, they're stealing a part of your soul. "What's next for you?" someone called out. "I'm going to do what I should have been doing all along," I said. "I'm going to narrate audiobooks under my own name, build my own career, and make sure no one can ever take credit for my work again." "And your sister?" I looked back at the courthouse where Rachel was being escorted out a side entrance by her lawyer, her head down, her phone in her hand, probably reading the social media explosion of the verdict. "My sister made her choices," I said. "Now she gets to live with the consequences." The aftermath was everything I'd dreamed of during those morphine-hazy nights in hospice. The Voice Arts Awards Committee formally revoked Rachel's award. The trophy was removed from her house by courier and ceremonially destroyed. A note went into the official records. Award rescinded due to fraudulent narration. The publisher recalled all copies of The Midnight Serpent with Rachel's name on them. The audiobook was re-released with proper credit. Narrated by Emma Winters. Sales actually increased. The scandal had drawn attention to the book, and now listeners wanted to support the real narrator. Every contract Rachel had signed based on her fraudulent credentials was voided. She went from a 6-figure audiobook narrator to unemployable overnight. No publisher would touch her. No author would hire her. Her agent was gone, her reputation destroyed, and her social media accounts a wasteland of people telling her exactly what they thought of voice thieves. The internet, which had helped build her up, now gleefully tore her down. Her Wikipedia page's opening line was updated. Rachel Winters, born 1990, is a former audiobook narrator who was convicted of voice fraud in 2017. But the most satisfying consequence wasn't the money or the public humiliation. It was the message that echoed through the voice acting industry. Within months, major publishers updated their contracts to include specific clauses about narrator verification. Voice actor unions strengthened their protections against fraud. Audio forensics became standard practice for disputed narrations. My case became the textbook example taught in every entertainment law class and voice acting seminar. I'd changed the industry. My second chance at life had created a legacy that would protect countless other voice actors from the same exploitation. With the settlement money, I did what I'd always dreamed of in my first life, but never had the resources to achieve. I built a proper recording studio, not a converted closet with foam panels and budget equipment, a real professional studio with isolation booths, high-end microphones, professional mixing boards, and acoustically treated rooms. I hired an assistant to help with the technical aspects and a business manager to handle the administrative work. I named it Phoenix Voice Studios and launched with a simple mission statement: your voice, your credit, your career. The audiobook offers flooded in. Authors who'd followed the case wanted me to narrate their work. Publishers who'd seen the quality of my stolen narration wanted to work with me directly. Agents who understood the value of a narrator with a compelling origin story wanted to represent me. I was selective. I chose projects I cared about, stories that resonated with me, and authors who respected the collaboration between writer and narrator. I negotiated fair contracts that protected my work. I built relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Within a year, I'd narrated 15 audiobooks under my own name. Within 2 years, I'd won my first legitimate award, the same Voice Arts Award Rachel had stolen from me but earned through my own credited work. Within 3 years, I had my own 6-book contract, my own profile in industry magazines, and my own interviews on podcasts where I talked honestly about voice theft, family betrayal, and the importance of protecting creative work. I'd become everything Rachel had tried to be, but I'd done it the right way. I saw Rachel one more time, 3 years after the trial. I was at a coffee shop near my studio reviewing a manuscript before recording when someone sat down across from me. I looked up to find my sister, older and harder, and somehow smaller than I remembered. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," Rachel said quietly. "You're right about that. I needed to tell you something. I need to say it out loud to you, not just to a therapist or a lawyer." I closed my laptop. "Go ahead." "I was jealous of you," Rachel said, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for years. "Since we were kids, I was jealous. You got the voice, the talent, the thing that made you special, and I got... what? I was pretty, I was social, but I didn't have anything that was mine. And I hated you for it. So you stole it." "So I stole it," she agreed. "I told myself it wasn't really stealing because we're family, because you weren't using it for anything important. Because I deserved a break after working so hard to get into the industry. I told myself so many lies that I started believing them. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I spent 3 years in therapy trying to figure out how I became the kind of person who would do that to her own sister," Rachel said. "And I finally understand. I was so focused on what I didn't have that I couldn't see what I was destroying. I didn't just steal your voice, Emma. I tried to erase you. I tried to make it so that your talent, your work, your identity didn't matter. Because if you didn't matter, then maybe I could matter more." She looked down at her hands. "The irony is that I had other talents. I was good at connecting with people, at understanding marketing, at building platforms. I could have been a great audiobook producer, or an agent, or a publicist. But I was so obsessed with being the narrator, with being you, that I destroyed the person I actually was." "Is this an apology?" I asked. "No," Rachel said. An apology would assume I could make this right, and I can't. What I did to you was unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just telling you that I finally understand what I took from you, and I'm sorry I was too selfish and stupid to see it before." I studied her face, looking for manipulation, for the angle, for the trap. But all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I work in retail," Rachel said, "selling luxury handbags at a boutique downtown. It's humbling, but it's honest work, and I'm good at it. I help people find what actually suits them instead of pushing them toward what I think they should want." That's oddly poetic. I guess I finally learned something. She stood up. "I won't bother you again. I just needed you to know that you were right about all of it, and I'm sorry." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with my coffee and my thoughts. I didn't forgive her. I'm not sure I ever will. Forgiveness isn't something you can force, and some betrayals cut too deep to heal completely. But I did feel something shift inside me, a release of the anger I'd been carrying since my first death. Rachel had given me something I didn't know I needed: acknowledgement. Not an excuse, not a justification, but a simple recognition that what she'd done was wrong and that I had every right to be angry about it. It didn't change the past. It didn't erase the trauma or the years of exploitation. But it did let me finally, fully move forward. 5 years after my rebirth, I was exactly where I dreamed of being in my first life but never thought possible. Phoenix Voice Studios had expanded to include 3 recording booths and a team of 5 narrators working under fair contracts with full credit for their work. I'd narrated 43 audiobooks under my own name, won 3 industry awards, and been invited to speak at the Voice Arts Awards ceremony. The same ceremony where I'd once watched Rachel accept my stolen trophy. This time, I was the one on stage. Voice theft is more common than people realize, I told the audience of voice actors, publishers, and industry professionals. It happens when actors aren't credited for their work. It happens when ADR performers are replaced without compensation. It happens when narrators are pressured to accept unfair contracts. It happens when the industry treats voices as interchangeable commodities instead of unique creative contributions. My case was extreme, but the underlying problem is systemic. We need to value voice work the way we value writing, directing, and performing in other mediums. We need to protect narrators the same way we protect authors. We need to recognize that when you hire a voice actor, you're not just renting their vocal cords, you're collaborating with an artist who brings interpretation, emotion, and life to words on a page. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, a young woman approached me nervously. Miss Winters? I just wanted to thank you. I'm a new voice actor, and your case taught me to always get everything in writing, to never work without a contract, and to never let anyone make me feel like my work isn't valuable. That's exactly right, I said. Your voice is your power. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. She smiled and walked away, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I'd fought for. Not just personal revenge, but systemic change that would protect the next generation of voice actors from what I'd experienced. On the 7th anniversary of my rebirth, the day I'd woken up gasping in my childhood bedroom with 7 years of future knowledge and a burning need for justice, I recorded a special project. I narrated my own story. Not a dry legal recounting, but a full audiobook memoir about the betrayal, the death, the rebirth, and the revenge. I called it Phoenix Rising: How I Reclaimed My Voice, and self-published it with all proceeds going to a foundation I'd established to provide legal aid for exploited voice actors. The audiobook became a surprise hit, not just in voice acting communities, but among anyone who'd ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. It resonated with people who'd had their work stolen, their credit taken, their contributions erased. Reviews poured in, a raw, honest account of betrayal and redemption. Emma Winters doesn't just tell her story, she performs it with every ounce of emotion she brought to the narration that was stolen from her. This is what justice sounds like. The memoir won the Audiobook of the Year award. I accepted the trophy, crystal, heavy, exactly like the one Rachel had once held while my voice echoed through the speakers, and looked out at the audience. 7 years ago, I died angry and powerless, I said. I woke up with a second chance and a choice. I could avoid the pain by changing the timeline completely, or I could let the betrayal happen again so I could document it and fight back properly. I chose the harder path because some fights are worth having, even when they hurt. To everyone who's had their work stolen, their voice silenced, or their contributions erased, fight back, document everything, know your worth, and never let anyone convince you that being family or friends or colleagues gives them the right to exploit you. Your voice matters. Make sure the world knows it's yours. The applause was deafening. I never saw Rachel again after that coffee shop conversation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a different state, changed her name, and built a quiet life far from the entertainment industry. She'd married someone who knew nothing about her past, had a kid, and worked as a store manager at a small boutique. I didn't feel bad for her, but I didn't feel vindictive anymore either. She was living with the consequences of her choices, just as I was thriving because of mine. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't been reborn, if I'd just died in that hospice bed at 30, whispering my way through those final hours while Rachel continued to profit from my stolen voice. Would she have ever felt guilty? Would she have ever been caught? Probably not. The uncomfortable truth was that voice theft usually goes unpunished. Actors are exploited, their work is stolen, and the perpetrators face no consequences because the victims lack the resources, the evidence, or the willpower to fight back. I'd been given an extraordinary advantage, literal knowledge of the future, and a second chance to prepare the perfect case. But my victory had created ripples that helped others who didn't have that advantage. The laws had changed. The industry had evolved. The case law I'd established was now cited in courts across the country. Every voice actor who negotiated a better contract, who demanded proper credit, or who fought back against exploitation was benefiting from what I'd done. That was my legacy. Not the money, not the awards, not even the personal satisfaction of watching Rachel's empire crumble. My legacy was making it harder for the next Rachel to steal from the next Emma. 10 years after my rebirth, I stood in the largest booth of Phoenix Voice Studios, preparing to record the audiobook that would define my career. It was a literary novel about a woman who discovers she can hear the voices of the dead, specifically the voices of people who'd died with unfinished business, unspoken words, or unresolved rage. The author had written it with me in mind, having followed my story and been inspired by the idea of reclaiming stolen voices. The protagonist's name was Emma. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. As I read through the manuscript one final time before recording, I came across a passage that made me pause. The dead speak through us, whether we acknowledge them or not. Every grudge we carry, every injustice we swallow, every time we silence ourselves to keep the peace, those are the voices of our own ghosts, the versions of ourselves we killed to survive. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a chance to bring them back to life. I thought about the Emma who'd died at 30, voiceless and furious. The Emma who'd wasted her final months researching a betrayal she'd never be able to fight. The Emma who'd closed her eyes in that hospice bed and accepted that some injustices would never be corrected. She was my ghost, the version of myself I'd killed by being reborn. But in a way, this whole journey had been about bringing her back to life. Every word I spoke in that courtroom, every audiobook I narrated under my own name, every voice actor I helped protect. That was her voice, finally being heard. I put on my headphones, adjusted the microphone, and pressed record. Chapter 1, I began, my voice strong and clear and undeniably mine. The first voice I heard after dying was my own. The audiobook of The Voice of the Dead became the best-selling literary fiction audiobook of the year. It was nominated for every major award and won most of them. Critics praised my haunting, deeply personal performance and my ability to embody the rage and rebirth of a woman reclaiming her power. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just performing a character. I was channeling my own experience, the death, the rebirth, the meticulous planning, and the savage satisfaction of watching my betrayer fall. Every word was true, even when it was fiction. On the night of the award ceremony, I wore a red dress, the color of phoenixes, of rebirth, of blood. I'd invited Mom as my guest, and she sat in the audience crying proud tears as I accepted yet another trophy. This award belongs to everyone who's ever had to fight to be heard, I said into the microphone. To everyone who's been stolen from, silenced, or erased. To everyone who died, once and chose to rise again, fiercer and stronger than before. I used to think my sister stole my voice, but she didn't. She stole my credit, my work, my recognition. But my voice was always mine. It was here in my throat, in my breath, in every word I spoke. She could claim it, but she could never own it. And when I got my second chance, I used that voice to tell the truth. I used it to fight back. I used it to build something better than what was taken from me. I held up the trophy. This isn't just mine. This belongs to every voice actor who's been exploited and fought back. This belongs to every artist who's had their work stolen and refused to stay silent. This belongs to every person who's ever had to rise from the ashes of betrayal and burn twice as bright. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. That night after the ceremony, I stood alone on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out over the city lights. The crystal trophy sat on the table behind me, catching the lamplight and throwing rainbow fragments across the walls. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app, the same app I'd used 7 years ago to secretly record Rachel's phone conversations during those 6 days of recording sessions. I pressed record. This is Emma Winters, 10 years after rebirth. I'm 33 years old. I'm healthy, I'm successful, I'm happy. My voice is mine, my work is credited, and my sister's betrayal became the foundation of a career and a legacy I'm proud of. If I die tomorrow, if this is all the time I get in the second life, I'll die satisfied. I took the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into something meaningful. I protected other people from the same fate. I changed the industry. I proved that voice actors deserve respect, recognition, and rights. But more than that, I learned something important. Revenge isn't just about making the person who hurt you suffer. Real revenge is becoming so successful, so undeniably talented, so impossible to ignore that their betrayal becomes a footnote in your success story. Rachel Winters stole my voice recording for her audiobook. And because she did, I became the most famous, most awarded, most respected voice actor of my generation. She tried to erase me. Instead, she made me immortal. I paused, then added one final line. Thank you, Rachel, for the betrayal, for the theft, and for giving me a reason to rise. I pressed stop and saved the file with the date. 10 years, exact. Then I went back inside, poured myself a glass of champagne, and toasted the woman I'd been in my first life. The one who'd died angry and powerless, but whose rage had fueled everything I'd become. This one's for you, I whispered to the ghost of my former self, and in the reflection of the window, I could have sworn I saw her smile back. Epilogue. 20 years after my rebirth, The Midnight Serpent was adapted into a premium television series, SI. The producers wanted to use the original audiobook narration for certain voiceover sequences, the protagonist's internal monologue, flashback scenes, dream sequences. They contacted me through my agent. The offer was substantial, $500,000 for the rights to use portions of my original recording in the TV adaptation, plus residuals for every episode aired and every streaming view. I sat in my office at Phoenix Voice Studios, which had now expanded into a full production company with 20 narrators, 3 producers, and a legal team specializing in voice actor rights, and read through the contract. Everything was proper. Full credit as narrator, my name in the opening credits, approval rights over how my recordings would be used, profit participation. It was everything a voice actor could ask for, but there was one interesting clause buried in page 17. The producers acknowledged that the original audiobook was performed by Emma Winters and that Rachel Winters, formerly credited as narrator, has no ownership, rights, or claim to the recordings. The producers have obtained a signed release from Rachel Winters acknowledging this fact and relinquishing any claim to participations in this adaptation. They'd made Rachel sign a document admitting once again that she'd stolen my work. 20 years later, she was still signing papers that confirmed her fraud. I signed the contract and sent it back with a note. Please send a copy of Rachel's release form to my office, for the files. When it arrived, I framed it next to my first Voice Arts Award and hung it on the wall. Some victories deserve to be savored forever. The TV adaptation was a massive success. My voice opened every episode, narrating the protagonist's darkest thoughts and most intimate fears. The producers used my recordings with respect, weaving them seamlessly into the show's soundscape. Critics mentioned the haunting, intimate narration by Emma Winters in nearly every review. My name trended on social media. New listeners discovered the original audiobook and were surprised to learn about the scandal that had surrounded its release 2 decades earlier. A new generation discovered my story, not as a cautionary tale of betrayal, but as an example of how to fight back and win. Podcasts did deep dives into the case. True crime shows covered it as a fraud investigation. Film schools taught it as an example of intellectual property theft. And voice acting programs made it required reading for every student. The Winters case, protecting your voice in the digital age. I'd become a verb. When voice actors talked about protecting their work, they'd say, make sure you Winters it, meaning document everything, get proper contracts, and never trust family to not exploit you. Rachel's name appeared in those discussions too, but only as a warning. Don't be a Rachel Winters. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't assume you can get away with fraud because you're family. Our us. Names were permanently linked in voice acting history. Mine as the victim who fought back and changed the industry, hers as the cautionary tale of hubris and theft. I'd turned our shared DNA into a legacy that would outlive us both. On my 50th birthday, which would have been 17 years past my death date in the original timeline, I recorded one final voice memo. This is Emma Winters, 50 years old, 40 years into a career that almost never happened. 27 years after being reborn with knowledge of my own death and my sister's betrayal. People sometimes ask me if I regret how I handled things. If I wish I'd confronted Rachel earlier or forgiven her sooner or taken a different path, the answer is no, not even a little. What Rachel did to me was wrong, and she deserved everything that happened to her. But more than that, she gave me something precious. Clarity. I know exactly what I'm capable of. I know I can survive both the betrayal, death, and rebirth. I know I can build something meaningful from nothing. I know my voice, literal and metaphorical, has power. I spent my first life dying slowly, powerless and voiceless. I've spent my second life fully alive, using my voice to build a legacy that protects others. If I had to choose between a life where Rachel never betrayed me and a life where I got to become this version of myself, stronger, wiser, unbreakable, I'd choose this one. Every single time. My sister stole my voice recording for her audiobook. After Rebirth, I sued and got all her royalties. And then I used that money to build an empire that ensured no one could ever steal from voice actors again. That's not just revenge. That's transformation. That's a life well lived. I pressed stop and saved the file with a title. Final Thoughts, Emma Winters, Voice of a Generation. Then I deleted it. Some things don't need to be preserved. Some victories don't need to be documented. It's enough to know that I won. Not just once in a courtroom, but every single day since, every time I speak and the world listens. My voice was stolen once. It will never be stolen again.